I'm very curious about this thing we call coaching and how it helps people on the journeys they take through their professional lives. Coaching itself is a professional practice, but how does it compare to other, more well-known professions? What's it like? What's it not like? And how do I get really good at it? Come join us for a conversation with coaching at its heart. Hello, and a warm welcome to this podcast on the business of coaching. I'm Hugh Reynolds, Head of Digital at Management Futures, and I record informal, insightful, and candid conversations with my colleagues, associates, and friends. Now, they're all great practitioners, and they've got lots of insightful experience to share. But I really just wanted to find an excuse to spend more time with them, whilst producing discussions that might spark further thinking and debate in our learning community. Today's guest is my close colleague, Matt Driver, Head of Coach Skills Development, who leads our highly successful intensive coaching skills programme. I regularly chat with Matt, off mic, drawing on his great experience as coach, consultant and author. And for the podcast recording, I wanted to try something a bit different. So, in true coaching style, I began by contracting with Matt about what this special conversation would be about and how we might structure it. Have a listen in and hear how that went. Today, what I want to uncover really is something about the work we do together, something about your ideas around coaching, and how to make people the best coach that they possibly can be. Does that sound okay for a conversation?
Well, that sounds great if we can do that in a podcast.
Yeah, well, let's try. Let's see. We can make a start anyway, Matt. So I think just in preparing for this conversation, I was thinking that we work with a lot of people who are at the beginning of their coaching journey, the beginning of a coaching career.
Yeah.
And we feel that very strongly that coaching is a profession for which you need to skill up. Yeah, you need to train properly for that. So
yes.
I wondered if I could ask some silly questions, really, maybe provocative questions about what coaching isn't. And through those silly questions, those light-hearted questions, maybe get to some more heavyweight ideas about our approach. So I'll just give it a go. I mean, wondering about what coaching is like. It almost seems like an exploration or some kind of hunt for solutions or hunt for ways of helping a client. So is it like being a great detective? Is that what you're doing when you're coaching? Are you looking for clues? Are you following leads, a bit like Sherlock Holmes might do?
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy, the Sherlock Holmes one, the detective one, the looking for clues one. I would say in some areas, in some ways, it is similar because we are attending to the words that people use, to the language, to the patterns in what they say. But I think there's a big difference for me because if you take the detective is looking for things that they're looking for. You know, they're looking to see whether you done it or you didn't, if you see what I mean, very simplistically. And we're not really listening or attending to somebody with an agenda in that way. So we're not trying to find out whether they did it or they didn't or who done it. We're trying to help the person learn about themselves and learn about their own thinking so that then they can have a wider array of choices in what they choose to do. So the agenda is very different, although we do try to pay attention to the clues, if you like, in what they say as well. Yeah,
but you're not setting setting a trail or sort of following a particular direction.
No, I do think that for some people who are learning coaching, you can get trapped into that. You can start to have your own hypotheses, as Sherlock Holmes often does, doesn't he? He's halfway through. He says, "Watson, I'm pretty sure I know who's guilty," or something like that. And we start to create our own hypotheses sometimes. And it's very important that we are aware of these and that we're not just pursuing those.
Mm.
that our main focus is on helping the person we are coaching to work things through themselves, and we're
Mm.
not suddenly finding ourselves leading the inquiry, so to speak. I think there's another really interesting thing about Sherlock Holmes for me,
Mm-hmm.
which probably is relevant for a coach, is Sherlock Holmes is massively expert in certain areas. He's done he's written these treatises, he's
Mm.
published things on different areas, but he's massively disinterested or uninterested in a whole lot of other things.
Mm.
And he appears, for example, to be hugely uninterested in what goes on inside the person in terms of their own feelings, for example.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't attend to that, whereas a good coach would. So a good coach is trying to stay open to the whole of what is there in their client, not just certain aspects of it that they're more interested in.
Mm.
So for me, that's also an important distinction.
So curiosity is still important. I just wonder,
Yeah.
because sometimes when I'm coaching or trying to coach,
Mm. Mm.
my curiosity gets the better of me, right? So
Yeah.
I think, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wonder what's behind that, or I'm
Yeah.
interested because it connects to something in my
Yeah.
background,
Yeah.
or my life experience or whatever.
Yeah.
So is curiosity still a part of this?
I think curiosity is a really useful, um, what would we call it, an attribute
Hmm.
for a
Hmm.
coach. As long as you know when you're getting hooked. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for example, if I'm working with you and you start to tell me about, I don't know, a play you went to see,
Yes. Yeah.
and I went to see it as well, and I happened to really like the author of that play,
Mm-hmm.
then I can get hooked into this, and I can start to take over the agenda if I'm not careful.
Mm.
So there's something about being curious about what is important for you in
Mm-hmm.
this, rather than interested in for my own curiosity as
Right.
well.
Right.
And it's quite common. I always remember listening to somebody who was a new coach, and they said, "What would you like to talk about to their client?" And the client said, "Oh, I've got a new job."
Mm-hmm.
Right. And immediately the coach said, "So what's the job and who are you working with?" Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because they knew some of the context. Now, immediately, what's happening at this point is it's the coach driving the agenda here. So their curiosity has taken over,
Mm.
and unwittingly, we've started to attend to their agenda, of interest, of knowledge. So there's something about being curious, but also being attentive to not asking questions just for your own curiosity, but asking questions which support your client's thinking.
Mm. So
Yeah.
in an odd way, like returning to that point you made about Sherlock Holmes being great at some things and completely uninterested in other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
there's a there seems to be a sort of craft or an art there to picking out those things that are important for the client, as determined by the client, staying in
Yeah.
their agenda,
Yeah.
and but perhaps having some limitation on that curiosity, or perhaps reining it in sometimes when you
Yes.
realize that you're being carried away with it, and you're filling the conversation rather than allowing the client to.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we can get hooked into. If I'm working with you, I can get hooked into it because I'm interested in the same things as you. I can get hooked because I think I know
Mm-hmm.
what the answers are to your whatever your issue is. But I can also get hooked because I don't like what you're talking about. Because
Yeah.
I don't like Chekhov or whoever
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
playwright. Do you
Yeah.
see what I mean? And therefore part of me is stepping away from this
Mm.
because
Mm.
but actually I'm trying to remain curious and as interested as I can be, but in your agenda, not overlaying mine.
Right. Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. And maybe if we go from a
Mm.
great detective, a fictional
Yeah.
detective like Holmes,
Yeah.
to a doctor, or maybe to Dr. Watson, or
Yeah.
a great
Yeah.
surgeon. Okay.
Yes.
So are you, as a coach, using your skills to operate on the patient or intervene in their situation to set things right? Is that
Mm.
something that you're doing as a great coach? Are you being like a great doctor?
Well, again, there are elements of this which are which we are doing. We are trying to use our skills. We're trying to have high level skills, which doctors have, and
Mhm.
we are trying to intervene in the sense that we're trying to support our clients in working out what they want, or in solving a challenge that they face, or in uh, developing self knowledge and so on. I think for me the big difference, and I work a lot with people in the health sector.
Mhm.
The big difference for me is that typically your clinician has a kind of map of the situation in their mind,
Mm.
right? They're trying to diagnose very often, and they're asking you questions and getting you to talk, but they're mapping what you're saying onto their own mental model in order to diagnose, and then to prescribe, and then to suggest what is a treatment, or what is a way forward. And we're trying not to do that. What I'm not doing is, as a coach, is diagnosing you
Mhm.
and telling you what the answer is, or what the treatment is. And it's very, very easy for coaches to get hooked into that.
Matt, we often talk about reflection around
Yeah,
coaching, and I know that this means different things to different people, means different things to different coaches. But we also see that in medical practice, I guess, where you're reflecting on developing a procedure. So you're critiquing that, analysing it, you wanting to make it better,
yeah,
um, and reflecting on your professional practice.
yeah.
Is that a common theme between those two professions? You know, being a great doctor and a great coach.
Um, I feel like all my answers are to an extent,
Right.
but they certainly use the same word, and they do, as it were, pause and think about what's happened. As you say, quite often in the clinical world, what people are reflecting on is a procedure or an approach, a way of prescribing treatment or whatever, and reflecting on, did that work well? How did that go? Can I change that in some way as well? It's largely reflecting on things they have done with the patient or with somebody else. And what I'm always encouraging coaches to do is to do that kind of reflection. Was that the right tool to use in that conversation? That's fine. But also to reflect on themselves, and to think about, what did I do that worked? What did I do that I would do differently another time? How was I feeling? What did I struggle with? When did my own sort of hot buttons get pushed?
Mm.
Did I get pulled in? Did I? Do you see what I mean? I'm thinking about me. I'm reflecting on me rather than things outside of me. And I think that's an important component of developing as a coach, learning to reflect on yourself.
It sounds quite well. I know it is quite subjective. And one thing that I found when working with people who are developing as a coach is, they sometimes ask for evidence of your coaching, and if, like me, some people have been brought up in a more scientific tradition, perhaps natural sciences, where
Yeah,
we're thinking about objective evidence rather than cooking up the evidence ourselves, using our own voice or putting ourselves into the mix. So is there something there about subjectivity and objectivity that you've discovered in coaching, or in coaches that flourish?
absolutely, absolutely. They're both important. I think there's a danger with what you might call the scientific tradition, and I don't mean to sweep that aside in any way. It's not entirely valid, but there's a danger if you only apply that to yourself as a coach, that you don't fully develop yourself.
Hmm.
And when you're coaching, you see, it's not so much your knowledge which you're imparting. My knowledge of clinical procedures or the law or whatever it is. It's not so much that I'm imparting. It's me, actually. It's myself which is the instrument of the conversation, and therefore I have to develop myself too continually, and
Hmm.
reflect on myself as the instrument. So it's a little bit more scientific, with a small s, than it might seem. It's not just navel gazing.
Hmm.
it's in order for me to hone the instrument, which is myself, as the coach. And I think that's an important thing for people to bear in mind. Yeah, definitely. So just to say we reflect therefore on ourselves. That doesn't mean that objective, for example, evaluation is not important. It is important because I could go around just in my own little world thinking I'm a great coach and never triangulating that, if you like, with anybody else. And I think that's also something we can do, is to encourage good evaluation. One of the things we always suggest to new coaches is, as a minimum, at the end of a session, invite your client to give you some feedback, or just say, how has that been for you? And sometimes you don't get very much, but it's an important practice to do, so you are at least offering that triangulation, and that you maybe have a slightly more extended evaluation at the end of a whole assignment, when that coaching relationship comes to an end. The other thing that is, worth saying is that there's an increasing body of research evidence on coaching. So examining questions like, does coaching work?
Mm-hmm.
And if it does work, what kinds of coaching work? What are the elements of coaching that seem to work best? So one of the pieces of research that we did with one of our clients was to look at the involvement of sponsor figures in the coaching of a coachee.
So
Okay,
this would be somebody who is literally sponsoring them and paying for them?
yes, exactly. Very often their line manager.
Mm-hmm.
And where those people were actively involved and supportive with the coachee, then what was tracked was a significant increase in their performance the following year compared to people whose line managers were not so engaged as well. So that's what I would call a rather more objective thing. It's not so much about how the coach functioned, but it's about how the coaching functioned
Mm-hmm.
for the organisation. Yeah,
So there's intersubjectivity there. You're bringing in other voices, other
you are.
opinions, other perspectives. You've
Yeah,
got that three-way dynamic, which makes
yeah,
it much more interesting and complex, but also potentially valuable to the
yeah,
organisation and to the
yeah,
people being coached.
yeah,
I wonder if we could go um, a bit a bit beyond science, or perhaps
yeah.
before science. Science as we know it today emerged out of mystical practices, alchemy, things like this. So I'm going to ask you a question about magic, Matt, if you don't mind, because
All right.
I'm I'm interested in the tricks of the trade. Yeah, the
Okay.
ways that you wow your client or you conjure up things for them. Yeah, so I'm thinking about these tools. So you've got a magical box of tricks there. They might be models. They might be things like the Kipper tie that people familiar with management futures work might use. The
Mm,
Grow model. Everybody under the sun who's written a book about coaching has got their
mm,
prescribed way of doing it, a framework, a structure.
mm.
Um, is it like being a great magician, sort of pulling out these tricks from your bag?
Um, this is a great area for what's the right word? It's something that's very attractive sometimes for a coach to be seen to perform,
Hmm.
to impress, to put on a good show. And I think a lot of even very experienced coaches would from time to time be tempted in this way. And we're certainly not excluding using techniques and tools when they help the client.
Hmm.
I've occasionally met people who say, give me more tools and techniques, give me more tools and techniques. They're my lifeblood as a coach. And I'm immediately concerned that what they are doing is having this big box of tricks. And when they're coaching, what they're doing is always thinking about which of my tricks can I bring out here, rather than giving their full attention to the coachee or the client and their agenda.
Isn't it
So that
reassuring, though, Matt, to have? I mean, I bigged it up, this issue of impressing people, but isn't it also reassuring to go into a coaching session armed with arms full of those tools? There's a kind of scaffold or support to your practice. Is that perhaps more necessary for somebody at the beginning of their
yeah.
journey as a professional coach?
Well, there's a danger that if you at the beginning rely on these and you are armed, to use your
Hmm.
word, then you start to depend on them and you don't develop yourself. And it's actually yourself which is far more important. So it's very common that people will use a technique, but because they're not paying attention, they haven't been really developing themselves as a coach. It's just a technique. It's just something you do to them.
Hmm.
And very often the client is going, yeah, that's interesting. Do you see what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's it. So there's no real learning, there's no real insight, and so on, because it's a kind of, and it can become almost for some coaches a sort of time filler.
Hmm.
Yeah, let me have a semblance of being valuable, but actually not really being valuable. So I just think there's a big health warning around
Hmm.
these. I use them sparingly in my practice. I don't have a massive array of these things. I have some,
Hmm.
and I do use them, but I use them sparingly. And I try to make sure that I use them only when I've got enough evidence from my client that this might be useful. So it's fine to use them and have them available, but it's very important that the coach doesn't fall into the trap of wanting to be seen to be incredibly helpful and useful and high performing and everything else, because that's a big distraction. It means that your agenda as the coach is driving things actually.
Hmm. I'm really interested in this point because so
Mm,
often when I'm developing a workshop for coaches, like our
mm,
learning labs, or thinking about a podcast, or
yeah,
thinking of things to communicate around coaching,
yeah,
um, I sometimes get the same sorts of requests. Or can we have
yeah,
like a 3 minutes top tip on coaching, or
yeah,
5 minutes on this particular model,
yeah,
and whack that out online or on
yeah,
social media or something like this. And it kind of jars with what I hear you and other great coaches talking about, this thing about mindset, about being, and it can't be encapsulated within a soundbite or within a sort of advert for coaching that
yeah.
focuses on a particular model. So, sort of, I guess it's easy to do though, right? It's easy to teach these things,
Yeah.
and it's perhaps harder to teach mindset or to develop being as a coach. So, but you do this, right? Because you're in charge of the intensive coaching skills program at Management Futures. You also
Yeah.
lead on our ILM programs, diplomas and certificates. So you do this. So give us a bit of a bit of an insight under the covers of those programs. How do you do that without just falling back on cheap tricks?
Do you want my top three? My top three
Oh,
sound bites
I
for
love the irony of
yeah,
that, Matt, but no,
yeah.
no thanks.
Look, it's. I'm not saying these things are useless. I wouldn't say that at all. It's a bit of a PR trend over the last few years to have things like the top 10 of this and the top 5 of this, and your three things you have to do, or whatever it is. You see them in all kinds of sectors. They pop up on Facebook all the time and so on. So, and they're not necessarily useless, but the problem is that for many of them, you could have thought them yourself, couldn't you? If you'd have taken half a minute and written down your top three, you'd have probably come up with the same three, or
Hmm.
an equally valid top three as well. So uh, I'm not saying they're absolutely of no use. They could be useful if I genuinely need a couple of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just to say that, I think what I'm trying to balance in learning, in helping people to learn to be excellent coaches, I'm trying to balance skill, knowledge, and mindset,
Mm-hmm.
if you like. So it's good that they need to develop high levels of skill. They need to be able to build rapport, to tune in, to really listen in depth. And loads of people talk about active listening, but they don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a skill in not just knowing about it, but doing it. So we teach doing it as well. But there is some knowledge which is useful. It's useful to have knowledge of let's say a structure for a session. It's useful to have knowledge of some tools and techniques that you can use as and when. It can be useful to have some knowledge of a range of psychometrics that you might bring in, okay, for to support someone's learning. So some knowledge is useful. So I've got the skills, I've got the knowledge, and then I've also got also the knowledge, the other area of knowledge that's very useful when you're a coach is developing your knowledge of leadership concepts and ideas. That's very helpful. Knowledge of diversity topics, things like this, because they will come in to the coaching sessions that you are involved with. And that's one of the reasons that we offer that wide range, that you organise that wide range of learning labs every year, because they can support anybody, but they're very useful for coaches too, even if they're not specifically about coaching. So that's important for me. There's also this key area of mindset, okay? It's like the mental stance that you have. And one of the ways we talk about that is our 6 principles, originally written by Jenny Rogers, one of the founders of Management Futures, and Phil Hayes. And it's something that, for me, is very important. For example, one of the principles is that our clients are resourceful. Okay, now that sounds quite glib in one way, but do I really start my coaching with the attitude and the mindset that this person in front of me is resourceful? They're able, they're capable, they don't need fixing. If I really believe that, then that will guide how I interact with the person. It will help me to avoid being the surgeon. I mean, I'm, the stereotypical one that I described before. It will help me to avoid being Sherlock Holmes. It will help me to avoid feeling I have to sort it or perform, because I know they are resourceful, so they have within them the capability to identify goals, to identify strategies to achieve those goals as well, with a bit of help, with a bit of help to tease those out. But what I'm doing is teasing out the resourcefulness from them, not injecting it into that. So those 3 things for me are really important, whether you're doing a core training program or a qualification, is you're constantly looking at skill, knowledge, and mindset.
And it's
Certainly.
a combination.
I sound like I've fallen into your 3 key factors
yes.
trap, haven't I?
We got there in the end, but it's okay.
Yeah.
We took the scenic route, and it was
Yes.
very interesting and very beautiful. I just wanted to pick up before I've got another silly question for you in a moment, Matt. Believe me, but let me try a more subtle question based on what you just said there around fixing. Yeah, they don't need fixing, and for me, that's an interesting and subtle one, because sometimes I've been coached and I've come away thinking that the issue I was talking about, I'm not sure that my coach actually thought about it as an issue. It was almost denial of the issue needing fixing. So I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about, the difference between fixing a person and perhaps them fixing an issue for themselves.
Well, if I was your coach, then I would try to have the attitude that you may be experiencing quite a big challenge, and you may not feel very resourceful as you face that challenge. But my belief is that you are fundamentally resourceful, and those resources are there if we can find them. I think that's how I would think about it as well. So it's very common that people who have been coached, and I've had this experience lots of times, is that at the end of it they feel fixed, if I can call it like that. I don't know if that's a feeling, but they feel better. They feel mentally better than they did at the beginning, or they feel relieved, or they feel unburdened. They can feel lots of things, or they feel just more capable of handling a situation. They know what to do as well. So there is often a sense of something being fixed or adjusted or shifted or whatever, and that's true. But I would argue that's probably because the coach had this assumption that you have that capacity within you to find that. Okay, I didn't inject it. I didn't put it in. There are a few exceptions to this, where, for example, if I'm your coach and you're struggling with something, and I realise that I have some knowledge about the area you're struggling with, then I might, in keeping it limited in terms of the time, I might offer you some ideas, or I might say, well, look, Hugh, I do know quite a lot about this. I have a qualification in it. Would it be useful to share a couple of thoughts that come to me on this? That would be entirely legitimate, because it would be a bit fake if I didn't share knowledge that I have. Or I might say, I might know, Hugh, look, there's a very useful website on this, and would it be useful if I just signpost you to that at the end of our session, something like this. So I might offer some of my knowledge as well, but my fundamental stance is that you're a resourceful person, okay, and therefore you don't need fixing. The issue needs to be moved forward, or change needs to happen, or whatever, but you don't need to be fixed.
Hi, how's it going so far? You're listening to a podcast on the business of coaching from Management Futures. I'm Hugh Reynolds, Head of Digital Learning, and my conversational partner today is Matt Driver, Head of Coach Skills Development. We're in the middle of a chat about what coaching is and what it isn't. And in the process, we're surfacing some ideas about how we go about developing coaches and developing ourselves. We really hope you enjoy the last part of our conversation. I'm trying to make a link now to my next silly question, which is I'm on dangerous territory here, Matt, because I'm not really into football. But the question is around football. I know you're a great cricket fan, but I wanted to ask whether being a great coach is like being a great footballer. Having that match, hopefully not a fixed match. We're talking about fixing just there, but is there something here about helping the client to find the right goal and helping the client shoot at it? Yeah, so once we've found that goal, and once we've got a clear line of sight into the goal and we're not offside or anything like that, sorry, stretching this metaphor a bit too far, obviously. But is there something in that about just find the right goal?
There are a few thoughts that come to my mind here as well. What some of the research on coaching suggests that setting goals is very useful. And coaching which is about what you do want rather than what you don't want, if you see what I mean. So in that sense, goal focused is more powerful and leads to more change or behavioural change and so on. That's been reasonably well established. So in that sense, having a clear goal can be useful. The challenge is, though, can you imagine starting a football match where you didn't know where the goal was? If you see what I mean.
When the fog descends or like a snowstorm or something like that.
The challenge for us as coaches is that our coachees or our clients often come without clarity about their goal. So it's not a matter of just saying, so what's your goal? It's blah. It's actually helping them to work through a challenge or an issue to work out, well, that's what I don't want. That's the challenge. That's the issue. That's the problem that I face. And then helping them to sort of move their thinking towards, well, what do you want then? What is it that you're aiming for here? You see what I mean? Where is your goal and what is your goal? So there's something about discovering the goal as being part of the process of coaching, and it's the first state. It's near the top of most of the models, like GROW or T-GROW and the Kipper model and Oscar and others as well. You've got something like this towards the start of the. Now, when we say towards the start, it's often towards the start in the model on paper. Whether it's towards the start when you're actually in the conversation, that can vary. Sometimes it can take most of a session to work out goals, or it can take a large part of a first session to work out what the client actually wants. But that's all useful thinking that they've done. Anyway, having said all of that, so the analogy with a footballer is limited, as it is with many of the examples that we've talked about as well. I would say one thing which I have noticed, though, because I have coached. I have a qualification as a junior coach for rugby, and what I have noticed is that our players are resourceful too, and the sports coach can believe in the resourcefulness of their sport, of their athlete or their footballer, whatever, or they can just tell them stuff.
Yeah.
And what coaches often resort to, and it's very visible because they're often not trained, especially at sort of primary school age level. And they're often not formally trained, the coaches, that usually dads, and they do valiantly. But what they do is they just spiel out advice. They just tell them what to do. So half time, not going very well, and the coach dad stands there and just lectures the team. And I've observed this actually for real. What you notice is their body language gradually slumps, and within a few seconds, no one's listening anyway to what they're talking about. And what I understood when I trained as a coach was that if you ask them first, if you believe they're resourceful, and you say, "Okay, what's going well?" and you pause, they will tell you. And what else do we need to do? What do we need to do differently to play even better? They'll tell you what to do, even if they're only 7 or 8 years old. They will be able to tell you, we've got to pass better, we've got to run better, we've got whatever it is they tell you. Do you see what I mean? So there's something for me about believing in their resourcefulness. Excuse me, that was rather a long answer to your question.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And that belief in the person you're coaching, and realization that they have things within themselves that they can identify for themselves and articulate for themselves, even those 7-year-old rugby players. That speaks very clearly to me about, it's not just the goal, because sometimes I'm pushed for a goal when I'm coached. And then it can say, once we've got the goal, everything's straightforward, everything's downhill from there. But I'm guessing, I know there's a lot of hard work between the stage in the conversation where you set the goal and later on. So what happens in that space? At that the space of the playing field after you found your goal. What work are you doing there? What's really the next stage after finding that goal?
I'm not quite sure how far the rugby analogy is going to work here, but what I noticed in the as I became a rugby coach is that one of the principles is that you focus on skills, for example. So and you break down the game into the composite skills. And you just train one skill today. Today we're doing passing, so we're not doing kicking. We're only doing passing. So we don't attend to kicking if it happens, but we focus our attention, our feedback, our discussion on the passing in this case, for example. So we slightly artificially separate them out. We learn to do that skill really well, and then we put them all together when we play a match. And this is really how we run our training for coaching skills. We break the coaching down into the composite parts. Okay. So yes, you have a goal, and we do look at the skill of helping someone to set a goal for coaching. But having done that, you need to make sure that the rapport is consistent, that you're really there for them with your intention and your physicality and your eye contact and so on, that you show that you're really there, helping them to feel safe, to be able to be open and so on, that you really listen, that you listen in depth to what they say. So not just about factual stuff and not mapping everything onto your own internal model, but you really listen to the words they use, maybe emotive words, maybe they're giving a message about the importance and the significance of what it is as well. So you're really listening in exquisitely in depth here, and you're also listening to what they're not saying, what they haven't said as well. You're also using the skill of summary, which is a fantastic skill for a coach and is often not done socially and managerially and so on. And yet it's a huge enhancement. Just for the coachee to hear back their words is so powerful as well. So that's another core skill. There's a skill of really formulating really good questions as well. We use the expression powerful questions which provoke thought and insight, not that give facts, or help you understand, but which provoke insight in our client. That's really important as well. So you see, there's a whole body of skills which comes after. So you can set the goal, but you need all of those skills. And you have an eye on the process, whether it's the Tigro process or the Kipper process, just to guide you so that it's not an aimless chat or we're not just, as I said before, navel gazing. But what we're doing is we are purposeful. So we are in the end trying to score a goal or hit the goal, or meet the goal, whatever the expression is. Okay, but we're marshalling an understanding of the process. We're marshalling those skills. Okay, maybe for our clients to achieve their goals, they do need to collaborate. They need to pass the ball
Yeah.
You know what I mean, or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever sometimes, and so on. So they need to, to think around how they're playing as well, not just hitting the goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise they're going to be like that footballer that gets the ball and never passes and tries to score every time themselves. And that so people are often need to be helped to uh, look for support, for example.
Mm.
So there's
Mm.
a whole lot of other things which go behind.
It certainly sounds like that, Matt. And I think what you've managed to do there is give us a whistle stop tour of many of the things that are within our intensive coaching skills course. I should say something that I should perhaps have said earlier around the importance to us around observation, giving people feedback on the coaching that they're doing, giving opportunities for them to practice that. So we're not just teaching it, we're also looking at encouraging people to just do it and to give them really quality feedback on their coaching. And that happens within all our programs, and we take it very, very seriously. So I just wanted to sort of big up that aspect of the program. And also from what you've just said there, the integration is the difficult thing. So again, if you take one aspect of that, or we took one of the models that we teach on the ICS program, the Intensive Coaching Skills program, seeing that out of context doesn't make you a great coach. I guess that's an obvious thing, but maybe speaks to the topic of our conversation today.
Yeah. No, it does. It's useful, but I've said this many times to people: you can't learn to be a coach from a book. Or from reading. You have to do it. You absolutely have to do it. And just as there are other professions that you couldn't become a great surgeon without actually doing surgery. You could read all the books, but, and it's the same principle really here. You have to do it. And I've just very recently I was running one of our programs, and somebody came on the program who'd done a previous training, a fairly long training in coaching, and they said I did more practice on the first day of this of the ICS, the Management Futures program, than I did in the whole of the thing that I did before. They said it was entirely lectures, models, etc., etc. Now, they can be useful, but if you're not practicing, they're not much use.
Yeah, really, really interesting, and reminds me of when I was a teacher, and we'd work with trainee teachers from a couple of universities. One university sent the trainee teachers in their first term of the university course of the PGCE, they'd send them into schools. And there was another, actually more prestigious university that didn't do that. They lectured them for the first term. And I worked with these trainees, and you could always tell the difference between those two institutions because some of them had just been teaching and just got those practice hours in the bag already by their second term, and were absolutely flying. I'm going to stick with teaching. I feel comfortable because I used to be a teacher. I feel comfortable in teaching, so that's where I'm going to land our last question, if I may. And get out of the danger zone, which for me is anything to do with football. So in teaching, there's this idea that, some people have a misguided idea of teaching as something that, you learn a lot, you get the knowledge, you reach this sort of pinnacle of performance or practice, and then you just deliver. You go and help others to become as good as you, or at that set of skills or that section of knowledge. And I wondered if there's anything like that about being a coach. If there's, to be a coach, you have to have been there, done it, and now you're giving back. Or if there's something a bit more, what should I say, formative for the coach or developmental for the coach when they're coaching. So do they get something back from their coaching practice, or is it just working with people who aren't as good as them yet?
I was just reflecting that I've met some great teachers who are great coaches as well. So there is something that does, I think, if for a good teacher who they've learned to tune into people, they've learned to listen. Do you know what I mean? They've learned to ask good questions. So they've learned sometimes some very good and very useful skills and they're helping people develop and learn and grow as well, which I think coaching is about as well.
Mm.
I think, as you say, the big difference is, of course, that the teacher, in a sense, holds the agenda.
Mm.
If you're teaching me
Mm.
history, then probably almost certainly you know more about history than I do, and you know what the curriculum is and what we are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do. You don't sit down and say, "What would you like to talk about?" If you see
Mm-hmm.
what I mean. Whereas in coaching, I'm giving the client the agenda. It's their agenda, not mine. So I think that's, for me, a big difference. But there are a lot of skills and aptitudes that I see in good teachers that are very readily transferable to coaching as well. And I've also noticed that certainly a lot of people in the teaching world take to coaching, or
Mm.
they like being coached, and they like doing coaching themselves they do that quite readily. Um,
Is it important to grow or keep
yes,
growing? I know it's important as a teacher. Is it important
yeah,
as a coach to keep
yeah,
growing, keep developing, sort
yeah,
of to keeping on that journey of transformation, possibly?
yeah. It's vital, I would say. It's vital. Once I went to a big international company, I was applying to be on their coach register, to be an
Hmm.
external coach available to their people. And they one of the questions they asked me, which I thought was great, they said, "What have you done for your CPD in the last year?" Right now, they were only interviewing very experienced, qualified coaches,
Mm.
and they asked all of them, "What CPD have you done in the past year?" Okay, and that's a very good indicator for me. It probably is for a good teacher as well. What have you done to become a better coach in the
Mm.
last year? And if it's only, I mean, they need to have something. And I have met coaches that haven't got anything to say for the last year, and then I would be worried.
Mm.
I would be worried, because you'll be like that. Those teachers we've all come across that have been there too long,
Yeah.
and they've been trotting out the same lessons for
Yes.
decades in some cases, and they're just a bit flat and stale, really. They're not necessarily bad, and maybe they need a reboot or whatever. And we know that doesn't lead to the best learning, don't we, as well? And it doesn't lead to the best satisfaction for the teacher as well. Well, I think it's all very much the same for the coach. So I would say any good coach, professional coach, needs to be doing constant CPD.
Mm.
They need to be learning constantly more about themselves and about things, if you like. So you can read research, or you can read books on psychology, or you can read books on business. You can do some reading. But it's also very useful to attend workshops
Mm.
where you look at yourself as well, or find some avenues. I found, for a while I did some psychotherapy, and I found that incredibly helpful for my own work as a coach.
Mm.
Well, it helped me to get to know myself a bit more. I got a bit more knowledge about when I get my buttons pressed,
Hmm.
and about why I find some clients more difficult than others, which we will all do. It just gave me some new learning and some new insights, which I felt made me better able to work with a wider range of clients as well. So, and that was fairly recent. So, I would hope that anybody would be doing that consistent learning for themselves. Yeah,
Mm.
I would say also, and I think you kind of suggested this, that the actual process of training to be a coach, of doing the learning and ideally doing the qualification, but doing the core learning, is in itself hugely developmental for the coaches.
Mm.
So many people tell us at the end of their 4-day program, they very often say, "This was transformational for me," or "I'm a different person than I was at the beginning." Okay, in a good way, in a
Mm.
good way. Um, so it's if it's done well, it's a very developmental thing for the coach as well as the coachee.
And sometimes I feel guilty if I'm enjoying myself or getting something out of a coaching session. But
Yeah,
what you're saying there, the positive effect on me as a coach is also a good thing.
it's absolutely a good thing as long as it doesn't become the main agenda.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think, we one of the principles that we often espouse is that coaching is a relationship of equals, right? Between the in other words, I'm not superior to you as
Yeah.
my client,
Yeah.
because I don't necessarily have more knowledge than you about the topic we're talking about as well. So it's a relationship of equals, but it also is equal the other way around as well. That means they're not superior to me either. You see? So I do have probably some needs. I have a need not to be messed about, and maybe I have a need also to grow and develop through this process too. That's absolutely fine, as long as it doesn't exclude the other person's need.
Yes. And
Yeah,
interfere. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Matt, thank you ever so much. Thank you for being. I'm not sure if I've been your equal, but thank you ever so much
Absolutely.
for putting up with my my light-hearted questions and for giving some deep responses to those. I've learned new. We've worked together for several years now, and I've learned new things about you and your practice today. And I know that this is going to be a really insightful listen for our audiences. So thanks ever so much, Matt. Really appreciate your time on this.
Thanks very much, Hugh. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Thanks again to Matt Driver for giving so freely of his expertise and experience. And thanks to you for listening to it. Do check us out and what we're up to. Online, we live at managementfutures.co.uk. That's managementfutures.co.uk. I'm Hugh Reynolds, with the privilege of producing digital projects, and I'd love to hear from you if you'd like to suggest topics for future conversations around coaching, inclusive leadership, organisational culture, or indeed any other shared interest. Hope to see you soon.